We're getting the lead out and we're talking rough and tumble distortion. It's the one effect that every rocker needs. It's distortion time! So let's learn how to rock and roll with this thing right here. Hey everybody, Matt Bell with the Electric Violin Shop. Welcome back to our From Classical to Radical series, where we're teaching classically trained violinists how to easily enter the world of electrified music. This week we're talking about distortion. First of all, what is distortion? Every electrical circuit is designed to handle a certain amount of signal. When you're sending a signal that's inside that range, you're clean. When you send more signal than the circuit is designed to handle, then you get clipping or distortion. That's actually where the term overdrive comes from. We're overdriving that electrical circuit. Every circuit clips differently. You've got your maximum headroom of signal. If you try to send more signal than that, then it has to clip that waveform down. And we can either see square clipping, we can sort of see round clipping, and a lot of times when it's forcing that signal to fall inside that range, you'll actually get a little sawtooth chop inside there. Every circuit clips differently. And that's why there are different vacuum tubes in amps, because they sound differently. They handle that clipping, that distortion differently. And those are desired sounds in rock and roll. So some circuits are designed to be overdriven and others are not. Your soundboard channels are not designed to be overdriven, especially on the digital side. When they clip, they sound really bad. Your acoustic guitar amp is not meant to be overdriven. Your electric guitar amp is. And that's where the vast majority of guitar players get their distortion sound from, is from that tube section of their amp. Now, we've said this before, but there's probably 1,000 electric guitar players out there for every electric violinist. So they're not building gear for electric violinists. We have to sort of grab this guitar gear and find out how to make it work for us. You're going to have to sort through the available options and find which ones work best with your instrument. There's very little consensus in the guitar community about what distortion sounds the best. That's why there are so many different amps, so many different guitars, so many different pedals. Everybody sort of likes their own thing. So we can't really expect there to be consensus in the violin community. What we can agree on, though, is that violins act very differently than guitars do. There's a couple reasons why. Electric violins are very, very high impedance instruments. We've talked about that in previous videos. Electric guitars are significantly lower. You can't just plug your Viper into a Fender Twin Reverb and get the same effect that a guitar would. You either need a preamp, a DI, or some device to step down your impedance so you don't have this massive impedance mismatch between the instrument and the amp. If you think an impedance mismatch sounds bad in a clean system, it gets far, far worse in a distorted system. Why? Because distortion adds a lot of high frequency waveforms. We talked about that chop. And if your sound already has a lot of highs in it, I think that thin, reedy sound that you get from an impedance mismatch, it's going to get far worse. So please manage your signal impedance well. A simple preamp goes a long way. The second reason that violins act differently than guitars do is violins are bowed and not plucked. Now, when a guitar is plucked, we have a very crisp, clean start to the note and then a rapid decay. The envelope of the note sort of looks like this. Violin notes tend to have a softer attack and then no decay whatsoever if you're pulling the bow. So you get this more of a square envelope than this decay. This can contribute to like a muddy, messy sound that just gets all tangled up with itself and it sounds like tackle football. The third thing is violins generally use piezo pickups and electric guitars tend to use magnetic pickups. Now there's some differences here in physics we won't get into, but just understand that the piezo versus magnetic thing matters. Violins are also tuned much higher and use much shorter and less massy strings. The open E on a violin is an octave above the open E on a guitar. So double the frequency, a much higher incidence of overtones, and then that distortion adds even more high frequency overtones. So it's really easy for a distorted violin to get a real brittle, biting, harsh sound. Those are all just sort of different things to keep in mind when you're exploring distortion. There are workarounds, but it's important to understand what you're starting with and that you're starting in a different place than a guitar player is. Now, we mentioned that guitar players get most of their distortion from their amp, usually. The tube section in the amp is where most of that overdrive happens. Then there is a nonlinear amplifier, which is sort of the second section of their amp. that goes into a speaker cabinet that is also designed to color the tone. So you've got the preamp, the tube section that colors the tone. You've got this nonlinear amplifier that colors the tone. You have a speaker, and a lot of times they're sticking a microphone on that. All these things do color your tone. So since an electric guitar is pretty much always expected to sound like an electric guitar, that's fine. Many electric violinists, however, they want to alternately sound like an acoustic violin, then maybe in the next song they want to sound like an electric, a distorted sound. So if you're one of those people, and I am, it may not be in your best interest to get a guitar amp. Even on the cleanest settings, it's going to sound electric. So some of us are going to need a different solution than guitar players. Now, you know that there are distortion pedals and overdrive pedals or stomp boxes. We use those two terms interchangeably. Usually a guitar player will get the cleanest sound he's going to want out of his amp. So he's going to sort of dirty that thing up to where it's as clean as he's ever going to want it. And then he will add some overdrive or distortion to that in case he wants more, because sometimes you want less, sometimes you want more. So a distortion pedal or an overdrive pedal in front of the amp. What those do, a distortion pedal will add more distortion. An overdrive pedal, technically, some people use these terms interchangeably. In theory, they're not the same. A lot of times in practice, they are. An overdrive pedal actually boosts your signal, and it pushes you further into that clipping range on the amp. So if you've got a signal that's getting a little bit of clip in the tube section of the amp, if you boost that signal, obviously it's going to clip a little harder, so the net result will be more distortion. However, since some of us don't want to use a guitar amp, we get all of the distortion that we want from the pedal. So some of us are not getting our colored tone from an amp. We want to color our tone just with a stomp box. So one of the stomp boxes we really like at the Electric Violin Shop is the Soulfood Pedal. We've already done a video just for that pedal, and we're going to put a link up to where that is. The Soulfood Pedal will give you a fair amount of dirt when you run it wide open. If that's still not enough distortion for you, there's another pedal that we like called the Metal Muff pedal, and we've done a video on that too. A third option besides running through an amp or just using a pedal is that you can use an amp simulator, and that's what I use. Lots of multi-effects pedals have these amp simulators in them. The nice thing about the multi-effects and using the amp simulator is when I want a clean signal, I get a clean signal. When I want to run through an amp, I can run through an amp, and actually I can have several different amps in my rig. If I like this sound for one song, another sound for another song, another sound for another song, it's just as easy as pressing a button. I don't have to go buy a different amp. Listen to a lot of different electric guitar players and sort of find one that has a sound that you like. Understand you can't get to where they are exactly because we're working with two different animals here, but maybe you can sort of get an idea for the region of sound that you like. Do you like something real crunchy? Do you like something that's harsh? Do we want something fat, thin, creamy? There's just all these different sounds. Sort of find a mental target and then work toward that. Otherwise, you just end up chasing a ghost tone-wise. Now, that's how to get a distorted tone. How do we use it? One of the biggest things that you got to understand about distortion, it adds tons of sustain. Unless you're playing a solid body instrument, you're headed to feedback city. You need to know that even your solid body violin is going to sustain way more than it does when you're not running with distortion. And that's fine. You just need to know that it's coming. You need to be able to adjust for that with your right hand and your left hand. Another thing to understand about distortion is that it acts very differently with multiple notes at a time than it does with single notes. So double stops, triple stops are going to act very, very different than single notes do. So don't set your distortion level based on playing single notes and then get all surprised when you play a double stop and it just explodes on you. You want to find a good middle ground where you get enough crunch on your single notes to sound distorted the way you want, but it doesn't just go to Mud City when you play double stops. But just keep in mind that distortion does muddy your sound up a little bit. If you want to play some super intricate passages and you want all your notes to speak very clearly, you're going to have to play a little more percussively with your left hand and maybe back off on the distortion or the gain a little bit. I do what most guitar players do, and that's to have a cleaner sound that I use for more intricate passages, and then a chunkier, heavier sound that I'll use for playing my power chords and some of the chunk and filling up a lot of space.